coming out of these mandatory lockdowns, the biggest question I think that people are looking at the industry right now and they're asking, how are comics doing from this? How is the industry at large? And just looking at some of the news over the past few weeks, it kind of answers that question. Unfortunately, it shows a struggling market, and that's an absolute certain. IDW's been in trouble for a little while. This whole Chris Rael leaving the company, they hire someone else as publisher, and he goes on administrative leave just 5 days later. They announce managing editor, marketing manager, head graphic designer. All these guys have been let go. And so these kinds of things are happening just worldwide, of course. And it seems like the whole industry is taking a hit from COVID. It seems like almost every industry is honestly taking a hit from COVID. We saw just yesterday, the day before, Valiant had to close its New York office permanently, And it looks like they actually haven't even released any solicitations for October. I could be wrong. But, we see a lot of companies struggling right now. And we see a lot of people kind of being hush-hush about it, not really talking about that. In fact, from Valiant, the vice president of sales, he kind of made it out to be all about the closing having to do with the pandemic. A statement he made, he said, "Everyone at Valiant has been working remotely since the pandemic started in March. Keeping employees safe during this time is more important than anything else. So they will continue to work remotely for the foreseeable future. Thanks." That doesn't really, of course, answer the questions that people might have about the office closing. And look, it doesn't really mean this is the end of the company, like some people I see on Twitter. Both sides of the comic book culture war are at each other's throat consistently. I've stepped aside from all of this, and I'm looking at it from an outsider perspective. And, a lot of times things are a little bit more nuanced than one perspective. and that's exactly what I think here. It's likely a financial decision, of course, to close an office anytime that happens. But looking this, right in the eye, I'll say this, I'm blessed. My company's doing quite well. My buddy's company, actually, he had to shut down his office. All of his employees, they're working from home. But look, hey, they're still going to stay in business. He's made that very clear. They're still doing okay. That's a big deal because so many companies are having to close. We see tons of businesses. I mean, look at the movie industry. I think that almost every movie theater is probably going to go out of business at this point. So many struggles are happening. So, COVID was really the last thing that could have been good for all of the comic book industry and the place that they were at. And here's the sad part about this. I think a lot of shops will unfortunately have to close because of all this. And shops get hit first. That's the terrible part. But look, the more shops close, the more publishers will have to fold as well. It'll just be a trickle-down effect. That's really the way the things seem to happen. And just a few days ago, ICV2, they really talk about the finances in like nerd culture, gaming, and comic books. They reported COVID has given a huge hit to the industry. April through July of 2020 has seen comic releases down 63% versus 2019. That's big. Graphic novel releases are down 18%. Those numbers don't look good, of course. It's bad for shops. It's bad for publishers. It's really bad for creators, specifically indie creators, where, if this is your livelihood in this industry, it's got to be tough for you. We see more and more often now that even people who are doing a couple titles at Marvel, they may be working at like a Starbucks or something like that, having a secondary job, just not able to pay their bills on the amount of money that they make. Again, on this kind of stuff, I've seen this a lot in the news recently, people talking about Joe Quesada having this huge event at his house, or excuse me, his mansion, and him showing off his autographs, expensive like $20,000 pieces of paper kind of thing, and meanwhile, Aubrey Sitterson, is living in a rat-infested apartment through his entire time at Marvel. You know what I mean? It's these kind of, if he even, I don't even know if he worked at Marvel, but in comics. So it's these kinds of things that we're looking at. COVID has made them worse. Just the past few weeks, I've had a lot of cancellations from Marvel Comics, and some of these books are doing really well. Ghost Rider was a big title. Black Cat was selling well. Mary Jane was a big seller. Now I will say Doctor Strange hasn't been having huge numbers, but that's one of those interesting cancellations. We have the Doctor Strange movie coming out soon. Who knows when now? I don't even know if they're filming it. I don't pay attention really much to movies, but of course, I'm going to watch all the Marvel movies. Marvel Comics just seems to be showing more signs than just the cancellations. The publishers aren't making these announcements. This is what's interesting. We see creators coming out and being the ones they're outing on social media. They're like, oh, I'm the cover artist for this book, and it was just canceled. And everybody's like, what? We haven't seen any announcements. So we aren't really hearing much from the leadership at Marvel. No one's really talking. And that was the case for DC for a while too. During the pandemic, and finally we got some words from the leadership over there. I'm just curious, who's going to step up and start talking about all of these books being canceled. A business plan. This is the unfortunate part. I think that a lot of people will end up getting let go when it comes down to it. I see some of, a sister company that I work with, they had to let go, I guess it was a quarter of their people right after this whole pandemic hit. And, I guess when it comes down to it, it's all about business. And, I guess it has to be approached that way, of course. If certain books aren't making money, I think that a lot of those creators will let go, and, I did just watch a video over at Thinking Critical's channel, him and Perch, Comics by Perch, talking about this, and, Perch knows a lot of people in the industry. He owns a pretty large comic shop, and, he was saying today that people at Marvel are literally sending him messages telling him, how afraid they are. Do you have work? Are you, that's pretty wild. When it comes down to it, these people really are afraid of losing their jobs, and with good reason. The books are being canceled. Companies don't have a ton of money to put into anything right now after all of these mandatory lockdowns have occurred. It's just the way of the world right now, and look, as far as this pandemic's concerned, there are wildly different opinions all across the aisle about this politically. When it comes down to it, everybody feels kind of differently about COVID, what's happening. It's a very real thing that we're dealing with, whether it be people being infected with this horrible thing, or the economy being affected so deeply as well. There's so many things to consider. I'll say this, as far as it comes to creators, people working at Marvel, people working for these big publishers, heck, people working for these small indie publishing companies. This is a time, in my opinion, for creators to really think about the way that they communicate with people, online, specifically on social media. If they're even on social media, showing immense negativity toward any group, is not a good business model right now, in my opinion. I will say that, and we see it from both sides. I see big time people who have left the industry, and they're more on the kind of CG side of it, just being rude to people left and right. And you see, of course, the same folks, the kind of Dan Slott, just being mean to people online. It's not the time for that. This is a time. This is a time for people to come together, in my opinion. And I hate to say it, but that's the hardest thing. I think for people to set aside their personal politics and just look at the industry at large and say, look, we can treat each other with respect at least, and it can create a different environment if we want. I know that's the idealist in me talking right now, but I still believe that kind of thing's possible. So I want to know, tell me what you think about all of this. What do you think's going to happen with Valiant? What do you think's going to happen with Marvel? That's a big question. There's so much to really consider here. What do you think about comics at large? There's wildly different opinions right now. And some creators are fighting tooth and nail to argue how comics are having their best year ever, and then of course the opposing side of this, they're saying, oh, comics are dying. Comics are literally dying. So, look, each one of these opinions, they're overly exaggerated to say the very least. And looking at it from a logical perspective, even before this pandemic, comics were in a difficult place. They were having their struggles and ups and downs. There's things that have been done incorrectly in the industry, and there's good things that have been happening too. Things are going to be difficult in comics for a little while, just like in regular industry. And of course, the pandemic had a lot to do with this. But I'd like to hear what y'all have to say about it. What do you think the comics could do differently to kind of improve the environment? What do you think that needs to happen? A lot of people have different opinions. I'd absolutely love to hear what you have to say. Or, hey, just tell me I'm an idiot. Give me a thumbs down, whatever you'd like. I'd love to hear from y'all in the comments below. Look, guys, this is the time more now than ever. Support your local comic shop. You are the gateway into comics.